Imagine this. It is the mid-1970s and you are in a Soviet departmental store. You have just bought your dream, which is a brand new radio. The moment you plug it in, however, it just crackles and dies. So you're frustrated and you're angry and you carry it back to the store's service counter. The clerk just gives you a helpless little shrug and points to this small leather-bound notebook chained to the counter, which was labeled Kniga Żalob I Predlożeń, which is the book of complaints and suggestions. This book is supposed to be your savior. So you seize the moment, you pick up the pen and start writing, pouring your heart out on the page. And you hope against all hope that your query will be resolved. Every Soviet store, whether it is a hotel or repair shop or a service office, by law had to keep a complaint book readily available for customers. In fact, as early as 1926, the Soviet authorities decreed that all state and cooperative or private shops and even market stalls must have a complaint book by February 1st, 1927. You needed to have a pen, you needed to have the book, you needed to have a place to write, a table and a chair, and you needed to make sure that the book was readily available and the customers didn't have to furtively ask for it. So it needed to be in an accessible place. Okay, so that is all fair and good, but what exactly happened when a Soviet citizen tried to use the complaint book? It wasn't always so easy. In practice, it often turned into a mini battle between the customer and the staff. The store employees knew that every complaint entry was a black mark against their workplace, and this is something that their bosses or inspectors would see, so they weren't really exactly eager to hand over that book. And it kind of became like a folklore experience. Okay, so one common scenario was something like this. Like you ask for the book and the salesperson frowns and then says like, why do you need to write a complaint? Let's sort this out here and we will give you a replacement right away. No need for the book. So they were like try to appease you or distract you. There is actually an anecdote from the Smolensk in the late 1920s of a store manager who was pleading with the customer, like, why do you need the book? I'll get you your item without waiting in line. So kind of like bribing the complainer with a quick fix or a special treatment. And it was much better for them than having a critical comment officially recorded. Quite often, the complaint books were kept out of sight, sometimes literally under lock and key in the manager's office where they were actually supposed to be at the cashier. In 1929, there was an inspection in Moscow that found that majority of the shops, the book was actually hidden with the store manager, and only 1 in 3 stores actually kept it publicly at the cash register, which was required. And sometimes the store managers would go to great lengths to dissuade the customers from making a complaint, but then we met some really cool people that way. Let me tell you a story. So in 1936, a man named Korpusov wanted to file a complaint about a rude sales clerk. The store manager said that Korpusov was drunk and therefore refused to give him the book. Now my man, Korpusov, he was determined. He just marched to the nearby police station. He paid 3 rubles for a sobriety test. He got a certificate proving that he was sober, and he returned triumphantly, finally be allowed to write the complaint on your face. I mean, it shouldn't require that level of persistence, but in the USSR it sometimes did, and hats off to you, Korpusov, my man. Stores developed tricks to neuter the complaint system. Another tactic was that they would keep like 2 sets of books. One was genuine complaint book for customers to write in, and the second like pristine book that the management would show to the inspectors. There is one Leningrad grocery store which had an inspection in 1967 that discovered that the director had been maintaining a fake complaint book filled with either nothing or just glowing suggestions, while the real book, which had like 13 unresolved complaints about short weight and bad quality, was just locked away. This actually worked until it didn't, and he was caught and the director was demoted. In fact, this was the reason behind this legendary poster where the state is warning the store owner that even having a clean white pages cannot save you. So you've managed to file a complaint. What happened after that? So officially by the mid-1930s, the rule was that the complaints should be resolved within 48 hours. In reality, the replies could take weeks, sometimes even months, and many complaints were never answered at all. For example, of 6,500 complaints in Moscow, in 1929, about 23% of them got no response whatsoever. In some cases, the response came after such a delay or was like really unhelpful. Something like, we couldn't identify the rude waitress because we had no idea who she was. Even for valid complaints, the outcome was quite often a ritualistic, bureaucratic process. One frequent style of answer was that your suggestions have been taken on board. Appropriate measures will be implemented without specifying what measures were those exactly. And the Soviets, true to their spirit, had a word for this too. It was called odpiska, which is essentially a form letter reply that checked the box but resolved nothing. So like empty air. In some cases, responses were like even downright absurd or even defensive. Let me share some examples. So a customer in 1934 complained that a railway dining car had run out of tea. The official response was that it wasn't really incompetence, it was ideology. This dining car was built before the revolution to serve 20 or 30 privileged passengers. And now we are serving the masses of working people. And that is why we have difficulties. We are forced to cook soup at the expense of tea at certain hours. And when we build new Soviet dining cars, these shortcomings will be eliminated. So in short, no tea for you because socialism serves more people than capitalism did. Similarly, a man complained about a worm in his cafeteria soup. The cafeteria director's written response was just this. Like, he said that the cook who prepared the borscht does not agree that any worm could have gotten into it. Okay. There is another one. A store manager who was replying to an accusation of his salespeople being rude, he wrote that, yes, there is rudeness, because you just can't manage without rudeness when dealing with women. Which is mind-blowing for me because, like, Soviet Union itself was a very gender equal society. I mean, women had rights in the Soviet Union that many women in the world didn't have at that time, and Soviet Union actually prided itself on that. So it's very surprising for me that he singled out women like that. But yeah, sometimes actually complaining could even get you into trouble. In 1930s, there was one shop commission that actually made a report on citizens who were complaining about poor service. And they said that they don't understand the difficulties of the transitional economy. Like, imagine this. You go to a restaurant and you complain that you are serving poor food, and then in return, the restaurant makes a report about you, sends it to your workplace, and tells that you people, you don't understand the realities of the economy and you need to be trained. And this is exactly what happened. But that was like a bit of a tough time in the 1930s during the transition and all that. But what exactly did people complain about? The most common frustration was, of course, bad service, rude clerks and indifference and endless waiting. Across the Soviet cities in 1929, anywhere from 15 to 30% of the complaints were just about staff behavior. Sometimes those entries were like very heartbreaking. There is one person that wrote that 2 days ago they refused to sell me the uniform because I didn't have an invitation. Today I come with an invitation and the queue is outrageous. When will a person become person? There is another complaint that targeted a specific clerk. The seller Paramonova conducts herself tactlessly, calling buyers sick. Even something simple as naming the clerk became cathartic for them. Okay, and then there were, of course, like these classic market grievances, like being cheated on scales or miscounting at the till. In 1940 Leningrad, for example, about 1,200 of 16,000 complaints were, like about 8% were about short waits and overcharging. And then there was also complaints about low quality or spoiled goods, which was about 7%. And in public catering, like for example, restaurants and all that, people actually took the time to describe sour soup and worm-filled meat and other horrors like that. In one 1953 report, there were about 877 complaints were just about bad food, which was about 24%. And then there were, of course, unsanitary conditions as well, which made up a smaller slice, about 2%, but still enough to fill the pages with mentions of flies and dirty counters and neglected restrooms. And finally, the most common and yet least solvable, which was shortages and queues. People poured their frustration into the complaint books, like, why is there never sugar? Why do we stand for hours? But those were dismissed as unfounded. In 1954, Leningrad trade inspectors marked 63% of the complaints unjustified, mostly from citizens demanding what no store could supply. The reason was quite simply that they decided that a store which has a shortfall of some goods is not their fault. It's the fault of the supply chain. And if we don't receive sugar, then we can't sell it to you. So yeah, of course, it's not our fault that you're coming to complain to us. So your complaint is unfounded. So what if you complained and nothing happened? Did you have any alternate paths? So this is how a Soviet customer's escalation ladder was typically. So you start with the local complaint book. That failed, you write a letter to the newspaper or to the local consumer union committee. Or you can even directly write to the Minister of Trade in Moscow if you were really, really bold. Newspapers in the USSR sometimes played a role similar to today's social media outrage. For example, if Pravda published a piece about how store number 5 in Moscow mistreats its customers, you can bet that the store's managers would be very, very sharply reprimanded. There are cases where consumers denied satisfaction to the store level, wrote to the newspapers like Leningrad Pravda, for example. There is one example from 1955 where a woman named Gonchuruk was called a thief by a cashier in a shop over a 1 ruble error. So she was called a thief and she grew really mad at it. And then she demanded to get the complaint book. The shop refused the complaint book. So she went back, she wrote a letter to a newspaper, which forwarded it to the city trade department, and that led to an official investigation and then, of course, an action. Quite a lot of very eye-opening stories. While researching and reading, one of the most striking revelations that I had was just how much ordinary Soviet people expected fairness despite everything. I mean, they knew about shortages and hardships, yet when the service was blatantly unfair, like a clerk was really rude, or a butcher gave them like 200 grams less than meat than they paid for, they felt that injustice and they wanted it to be corrected. The complaint book was their outlet to demand justice in the sense that it gave citizens a sense of agency. Some scholars argue that by inviting people to complain in an official way, the Soviet state itself acknowledged that the consumer is a stakeholder in the system. The complaints were actually taken into account by the authorities in decision making, as one analysis notes, and it could actually lead to serious consequences for those at fault. I mean, they could lead to that. So, ironically, even though from a customer service standpoint, the book rarely got your problem solved on the spot, from the system standpoint, it did serve its purpose. It helped identify violations and sometimes correct mismanagement behind the scenes. Think of it like a smoke alarm. It didn't douse the fire itself, but it signaled that the fire existed. So I want to return to our opening scene. You are the radio buyer and you have written your complaint in the big ledger. What happens next? Well, most likely after a week or two, you will get a written reply. Dear comrade, your concern has been forwarded to the quality control department. We regret the inconvenience. Perhaps the store manager gets a scolding from his boss about bad radios, and perhaps a notice goes out to the radio factory to check their quality. But it would have probably no immediate effect. But you still have a dead radio and you probably don't have a refund. Probably you will just go to a friend and then you will just ask him to fix it on the side, because Soviet people were actually really, really good at fixing stuff. And the complaint book entry probably just became a line in a report somewhere. I mean, the Soviet complaint department was kind of like a joke, because not really because people didn't have real complaints, but because the system wasn't really designed to provide satisfaction to the individual. I mean, as an individual, you are not really that important. The system was more important, and it was more important to keep the wheels turning. But even if it was a joke, it has an edge of tragedy and quite a lot of truth to it. For Soviet citizens, writing in that book was sometimes the only form of protest or demand that they could safely make as consumers. It was a small assertion of like, I deserve better. And the final anecdote that I want to share with you. One customer, citizen Susarin, wrote in June 1952 to complain that a store refused to exchange some very bad boots that he bought. He described in vivid detail how the saleswoman started shouting at me rudely, like I was like a harridan, like a homeless person, insulting me in every way that she could. She flat out refused to exchange the shoes or give me my money back, all the while swearing at me. So he was really angry. Interestingly, after venting in the book, Mr. Susarin didn't bother to show up when the store administration invited him for a follow-up meeting. He had probably gotten anger off his chest and move on. And this was really common. The act of writing itself was very cathartic. Many people, once they had penned their complaint, didn't pursue the matter further. The complaint book, in effect, became a pressure valve for public frustration. So yeah, that was it. But before I leave, I want to ask a question to you, and that is it any different today, or are we moving in a similar direction? I mean, do you matter more than the system? Does your satisfaction matter more than the system itself? Because quite often, if you are giving out a bad review or you are noting down something on Google reviews or Amazon, if the place or the company, they'll probably just try to bribe you to remove the review and get you to accept that as well. Because for them, the overall picture matters. The overall review system matters. And I mean, personally, I think that it's not that different. It's not, personally, I feel that we're moving in a similar direction where the individual is kind of being erased. I mean, you can still get your refunds. I mean, you can still get, there are a lot of protections as consumers. But then again, I feel that when we are reviewing, especially in the age of Amazon and all that, and the fake reviews, I don't know. I think it's probably not going to be that different. But yeah, that is just me thinking out loud and asking you a provocative question. All right, thank you for watching. If you like this video, then write a comment down below and tell me if there is any topic that you would like me to cover next. And on this note, I leave you. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.